ColinLasu. I am an assistant professor of mass communication at Albany State University in Albany, Georgia. And I've been there since the fall of 2005, mostly teaching radio production classes as well as media ethics type of courses. My presentation today is actually about it's based on a trip that I made to my native South Sudan. I tend to insist on the south part because it is actually the southern part of Sudan. Having not been there in 17 years, I was very keen on seeing what 2 years of a peaceful country has brought about and how that's getting exemplified. And I happen to be at a small town by the name Panyagor in Jonglei State, which is incidentally happened to be the state from which the late Dr. Jan Garang, the Mabiru, comes from, who was the leader, actually was the president up until his untimely demise in a helicopter crash, was the leader of the government of Southern Sudan. So my presentation today is mostly about the idea of looking at the concept of resilience using sort of a rubric that was set forth by the Van der Berg organization that's based in the Netherlands. And what they'll do is they look at the idea of resilience, especially in early childhood development, but I was able to sort of look at the model and look at some of the themes that emerged out of that and apply it in the context of how sports can serve as a way of building resilience, especially for youth, in this particular case in Panyagor, how they can get out of that mode of having been victims of a war, returning to a peaceful country that they really didn't know, because most of them left when they were very, very, very young. And so I look at it from the vantage point of sport, and this comes from direct observations and with my participation while I was in Panyagor, having assisted in the organizing of a soccer tournament, the first ever in the history of the town, specifically organized for young people, and this was last December of 2006. And so the idea behind resilience comes down to this notion that generally speaking, people who have had traumatic experiences are somehow able or can be assisted to get to a place where they are not just productive citizens of society, but are able to deal with some of the calamities. And in this case, since most of these youth had basically run into refuge at a very young age, seeing how they're coming back to a home they never knew and how they're adapting into that environment. So through the soccer tournament, we were able to get 4 teams representing the 4 neighboring villages. And so in essence, basically, we had 2 sets of uniform, and since we had 4 teams, that meant if the 2 teams that were playing finished their playing, everybody would take off their jerseys and then pass it on to the next team. And this turned out to be a much bigger thing, because when we thought about it, we thought this was just going to be a small thing which involved the 4 teams from these 4 villages, and that would be it. On the day of the first match, people were out in the field as early as 7 o'clock in the morning. One of the teams brought in their public address system with a generator to accompany it to provide power, and they had microphones, and they had, since 7 in the morning up until the last game was played, I believe it was about 6 o'clock or so, they had people singing, chanting, and basically having a great time. And so I started looking at this thing in terms of how they were able to not divorce with themselves, but to take into consideration their nasty experiences as refugees and channel it through sport. Now, incidentally, all these 4 teams were comprised of young men. All of them were played by young men. But the showing among young women was also very crucial to the success of the tournament, because before sort of the team doctors These, some of these young women were the ones who were the team doctors or the team assistants in providing water and nourishment and things like that. And most of these young women also came into play as impromptu sort of cheerleaders. And you'd see them running up and down, cheering their squad on and encouraging them to play the hardest that they could. This, besides the wrestling matches, which were a very, very big deal in that part of in Panjagor in particular, in the Panjagor area, it turned out that this soccer game was so popular that actually another tournament was organized for this past January. Of course, I'd left since then, and to a great extent, what I argue for is that this was able to provide or to humanize the experience and to move it, the experience of this youth, to move it from very much one of trauma, one of victimage, to a place where a lot of them are actually seeing themselves as active participants in their respective societies. To a great extent, most of these teams were walking from very, very far. We're talking about distances that they were walking about 2 hours to come and participate in this tournament. So when all is said and done, I think sports serves a very, very important role, especially in the case of South Sudan, where most of these young people, those who were not in refuge, most of them ended up either in some sort of military service, basically had their childhood robbed from them by the circumstances that they were in. And so what sport does, particularly with this, looking at this soccer tournament, it allowed young men to play, and play not in the sense of just the competition, which was very important, and they played very hard to compete for these trophies, but also to be able to play with each other and to meet each other and interact just as young people, which I believe was very, very crucial. So that is what I talk about for my presentation, and at the end of the day, that sort of sums up what I was looking at. I think health and science are very crucial because one of the recurring themes that has come out between yesterday, the opening session, and today at the main sessions, is this notion of that health is important. We had a keynote speaker, Manu Bull, talks about malaria, talked about HIV and AIDS. All these things are crucial because part of the thing that sport allows a participant to do is that you get into this regiment and the body is sort of trained to work. And so in essence, I believe health becomes crucial because one, it's more important. When I look at the case of South Sudan in particular, mental health becomes a crucial thing because there's not just anecdotal evidence, but actually verifiable evidence that when you participate in some rigorous physical activity, generally speaking, your mental health is also improved and up to date versus sitting idly, somewhere and just whatever it is that one had to do. That said, I think that is going to be a crucial thing. And then, of course, also in the dissemination of health messages, I think you would not have such a captive audience can be had really easily at sport events. And so if there are any messages, for example, take this soccer tournament I was talking about, come halftime, that's a good time for him to inject some messages because a great deal of some of these diseases we're talking about, be it malaria, be it HIV, most of them we can talk about putting more money into them. But incidentally, when information is probably one of the greatest piece of data that can be invested in. Because when people know that, for example, that pool or that pond of water that's behind your house is where the mosquitoes are going to lay their eggs, then turn around and grow into full-fledged mosquitoes and come around and suck your blood and to give you malaria, the malaria parasite. well, they're more likely to clear out those tires that are sitting behind their houses because that's where the water is going to be pooled in. And if they understand the significance of using mosquito nets, why it's important to use mosquito nets, this becomes crucial. And sometimes the sport, and especially we're talking particularly with youth, they would become important allies in dissemination of such messages because it then assists in getting it further because they're more believable, especially when you're trying to target fellow youth, especially on some of these diseases that I just mentioned.
My name's Dave.